name is Xiye Bastida, and I'm a 19-year-old climate justice activist. I was born and raised in Mexico in a small town called San Pedro Tultepec, and I was raised with an indigenous way of thinking, an indigenous philosophy. My dad is Otomi, which is an indigenous group in the highlands of central Mexico. And this meant that I saw the world in a reciprocal way. I knew that our role was to take care of Mother Earth because Mother Earth took care of us. And my dad taught me that with every decision that we make, we're supposed to look at the wisdom of the past 7 generations to ensure the stability of the future 7 generations. As I grew older, I realized that all of these things that I had been taught were being disrespected just around me, in my own town. I saw pollution. I saw Mexico City taking away our water, destroying our ecosystem, multinational companies coming in and building on top of our aquifer. And all of these things, all of these disconnects that I saw showed me that maybe people didn't think the way that I did. In 2015, when I was 13 years old, I saw flooding hit my hometown. And this is the instance that showed me that the climate crisis, everything that my parents had been teaching me, was already here. It wasn't going to happen in 50 or 100 years like we had been taught. And I decided that I couldn't wait to grow up to do something about this issue, that I had to start now. Fast forward to school, I'm in university now, and I started taking classes about my interests, about international relations, climate psychology, environmental philosophy. And one of the things that I learned that really shocked me was in my international relations class, the framework of realism, which basically says that for the past 2 centuries and longer, humanity has been acting in a framework of acquiring money and power. That's what's guided all of our principles. How do we get more? How do we expand? How do we just take over? And that, I think, is a bad philosophy to have, because if that is how we are foundationed, what hope do we have as future generations? Another thing that I learned is that for the past 50 years, the environmental movement has been heavily rooted in conservation efforts. And maybe in the United States, you like national parks and you like going, but this specific type of seeing the world, of caging nature in, of keeping it away from us, is what's causing this disconnect that we have. And we are transporting this way of thinking into other countries, into other societies, and that is actually harming people there, because you're telling people that they can't have the relationship that they've been having with nature forever. After this, I learned about climate psychology, and 2 things stood out to me. The first one is that a lot of the times people don't act on the climate crisis because of how far in the future it has been portrayed to be. So up until I was 15, 16 years old, anything that I would see about the climate crisis on the news would be about the end of the century. New York City would see sea level rise by the end of the century. We will see record temperatures by the end of the century. And I think that that type of psychological distance is what's keeping people away from actually acting and demanding change from politicians and companies and institutions. The second thing, which I think is even more important, is that we have to recognize that people have other needs. People have to feed their families, they have to pay rent, they have to go to work. And when these are the first needs that people have, you can't really ask them to take care of the environment, because that sounds a little selfish. And so the question that I pose to myself is, how do we, in this framework of realism, which is about thinking that all countries are in a state of anarchy, in this framework where people are not told about the climate crisis as something that's happening right now and are giving false solutions like recycling, how do you get people to actually act when our philosophy is bad and our way of seeing solutions is not there yet? The first time I went to a climate conference was in 2017. I went to the World Urban Forum in Malaysia. And there I learned about how everyone in the urban planning sector was really thinking about climate, because people who build cities have to think about how the climate crisis is going to impact these cities. And they were talking about building resilient cities, connected cities, cities that have protection against effects of the climate crisis. And then it was my turn to speak at that conference, the first time I ever spoke in front of people. And I told them that the crucial thing in climate solutions was bringing indigenous philosophy in, because every single part of the world is different, and the people who know the land best are people who have been living there for thousands of years. I brought up this story of my hometown where a university had come in and said, I want to build my university here. The indigenous people of the area said, you can't because this land is unstable. The university went ahead and built the building, and now it's an unfinished building because it's half sunk. And these type of experiences have shown me that we are not really listening, we're not really making spaces diverse, we're not really having that diversity of thought that is so necessary for us to actually cross the page on how to address the climate crisis in an intersectional and holistic way. So if you take anything away from this, is that we need to adopt a framework of climate sensibility, which means that we need to accept everything, all the emotions, all of the facts about the climate crisis, and actually have the courage to act upon them. Politicians need to recognize that I, as a 19-year-old, I'm fighting for my future every time that I do a speech, every time that I organize a strike. And we need to realize that the frameworks that we've had up until now have not been working because they are based on competition and individualism. And we need to shift to a way of cooperation and holistic solutions. Thank you.